Welcome from the US-Italy Global Affairs Forum. Today we host a conversation with Dr. Stanley Kober, Research Fellow in Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. Dr. Kober is expert in US strategy, Russian defense issues, and relationship between peace and democracy. Welcome, Dr. Kober. Dear Dr. Kober, welcome. First of all, I wanted to ask you about United States withdrawal from Middle East. It seems that in sort of continuity of Donald Trump policy, Biden withdrew from Iraq and Afghanistan. In the same time, in Germany, it seems that there's a vacuum of power after Merkel finished her mandate. Do you think you could be sufficiently powerful to take the place, or will be other powers filling the gap of US withdrawal from Middle East?
In terms of the United States, we are officially pivoting, rebalancing, whatever word you want to use, to deal with China. We have left Afghanistan. You mentioned Iraq. However, we have been reinforcing in Syria, which I don't understand. I'm reading these accounts of more and more stuff going into Syria. We have a very good relationship with the Kurds. And if you look at the Jerusalem Post just a day or two ago, they have an interview with a Kurdish official. Yes, the United States is supporting us. How can we do this? I am not so sure. My concern now for the Middle East, there are a couple of concerns. One is the situation with Iran. I know for all the talk about the return of the JCPOA and negotiation, I just don't see this getting any better. And the Israeli government itself seems very confrontational. You see these repeated attacks on Syria. And my own guess is that Ayatollah Khamenei still wants revenge for the assassination of Soleimani, for the assassination of the nuclear scientist. They are not going to take this sitting down. So I think people are just, not assessing this entirely correctly. There is still some hope, or some fear, depending on your political persuasion, of a nuclear agreement. I am not so sure. The other thing that concerns me, and that is the situation within Israel surrounding areas. Interesting article in Al Jazeera a few days ago. It said, whereas previous intifadas were top down, what we saw in Israel earlier this year with unrest among the Palestinians when you had that conflict with Gaza was bottom up. This is a matter of some concern. And Gianni, go ahead.
No, but on the other hand, you see that there are Italians taking charge in Iraq as to command the mission, and UK sending their boats in the Taiwan area, in the China-Taiwan crisis. So it seems that there's a sort of agreement of United States taking a step back and someone else filling the gap. What do you think?
There's a limit to what the UK can do, these countries, militarily. Look what's going on in the UK now. As you say, they've got the aircraft carrier off in the Pacific. In the meantime, in the UK, store shelves are empty. And people are going to wonder, what are we doing? And remember what happened in 1945 in the UK. They had an election, and Churchill lost. He was honored for his leadership in the war, but people said, we want normal lives now. Thank you very much, Winston Churchill. We are tired of saving the world. We want normal lives. Remember, Britain had been in both the First and Second World Wars. It was, I think, the only country that was in both world wars from the first day to the last. British people were tired. That's it. It is really quite extraordinary. I think this is one of the reasons you're seeing the U.S. withdrawal from a lot of these internet. American people did not expect that we would be involved in so many wars. And, President Biden has referred to this. There's now this phrase, the forever wars. People are tired.
Okay.
And that will apply for these other countries as well. If you see the what they are going through in terms of the domestic economies and so on. And the British armed forces are not that large. You mentioned Germany, they're not, they have, but their equipment is not really, from what I'm reading, not that well maintained. None of them can really project power all that well without the United States.
On second hand, yeah, but on second hand, it seems that the United States are planning on more diplomatic power, meaning that there are some embassies that now are with no representative, and it could be that they would choose higher profile for those embassies. I think about China. I think about Italy also. That Italy seems that with this government now is granting a bit more stability and a bit more, trust from outside countries. What do you think?
Well, there may be trust with Italy. I'm not so sure with other countries. There's not a whole lot of trust with France right now. France, big country in Europe, and I think other governments are looking at the way this all was handled. And a point I have made, and I have to be a little bit discreet, but who is the Undersecretary of State for Policy? Victoria Nuland. What is Victoria Nuland, I would say, most famous for? Her phone conversation, which was leaked to the internet in 2014, in which she told our ambassador to Ukraine, F.K, the EU. Yes. Okay. Biden couldn't have chosen anybody else as the Undersecretary of State for Policy. I think it tells you something about what the attitude is.
So it seems that this is also a continuity with Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump didn't give any, power to the EU. He didn't, see it as a partner.
Officially is, oh yes, we're back and so on. But when Nuland got the appointment to state, really. And I'm like the only one here who takes the sort of attitude, I guess. But I mean, that phone conversation was blunt. And, I don't see how you get around that language. And it's authentic. I mean, she presumably did not think she was being recorded. And it was put on the internet in 2014. And for me, this is important. There is a sense that we are the superpower, and we'll say some nice words, pat on the head, but we expect everybody finally to go along. And I think with a lot of people, this is beginning to wear thin, and that's my concern. And they may not be aware. Also, again, the tension's going up from the bottom. I mentioned the empty store shelves in Britain, but I don't think we're out of this financial crisis yet. There is a lot of debt in the world. And I am not so sure. You mentioned Italy. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference at Brookings, at one of our big think tanks. And it was on the euro. And one of the speakers was Carmen Reinhardt, who is now the chief economist of the World Bank. And she said in her prepared remarks, you tell me how Italy will get out of this, meaning its financial situation, particularly the banks. And during the Q&A, I asked her, okay, let's accept that. Does the common currency mean that Italy's distress would then be transmitted efficiently throughout the rest of the Eurozone? And she replied, next question. She then went on to elaborate, why she said that, pointing particularly to Spain, that you could have effects then transmitting throughout the Eurozone. This would be my concern. Would be the stability of the banking system. And if you had something, would that distress transmit throughout the Eurozone?
On the second hand, yeah, it was in a crisis moment, the most, heavy crisis time. There was a way of saying that Italy was too big to fail. Means that Italy was, in a certain way, too much important to the EU. Also because it is between the founders of the EU to fail, to allow it to fail.
Yeah. My concern here, we thought, I'll admit, I thought, when the Berlin Wall came down, I was euphoric. I was actually in Italy. I was lecturing at the Vatican when the Berlin Wall came down. And seriously, we could talk about that another time. The next year, in 1990, I was at a conference in Moscow at the Academy of Sciences. And one of the Soviet speakers proclaimed, we are going to be part of a global civilization. From New York to London to Paris to Moscow, one global civilization. It was still the Soviet Union then. This was still the Communist Party. I thought this is fantastic. That's all gone now. All gone. There are new walls going up all over the world. And they're not just physical walls. There are psychological walls. There's an us against them. And this idea of a global civilization has effectively been abandoned. I know in the United States now, it's just about nobody talks like this. It's sort of like us against them. The idea that we're all in this together.
Talking about, yeah.
And the problem with the walls, there are going to be problems with immigration. And this is also going to hurt EU unity, I suspect.
Talking about us against the others,
Yeah.
I was to talk about populism. So it seems that in Italy recently there has been local elections in many areas, and left wing seems that has won on the right wing. On the other hand, in a really important election like for Rome's mayor, the left wing is ahead of the right wing, but the most voted was a politician from Fratelli d'Italia, which is a post-fascist party, who has some stereotypes about the Shoah. talking about the United States, recently there has been a rally of Donald Trump in Iowa, which was very crowded. Do you think populism is still very up and running? It's still very.
I don't recognize the United States anymore. I don't understand what has happened to the Republican Party. To me, this is the party that voted for John McCain in 2008. We have primaries. This is bottom up. These are the voters. It's not smoke-filled rooms anymore. They voted for John McCain in 2008. They voted for Mitt Romney was their candidate in 2012. 2016, Trump appears out of nowhere. He shoves aside all the traditional politicians, senators, governors, this guy who's never run for office before. And he resonated with them instinctively. And now we're seeing it's sort of like a taffy pill. The Democratic Party is moving increasingly to the left. And the center is just very weak right now. Look at the difficulty we are having on these budget bills and the spending bills, this dancing about possibility of default. And it's really the Congress is very evenly divided. And there is practically no movement, no crossing of party lines on these important votes. And one of the things that concerns me even more in the United States, we may be seeing a little bit now of it in Europe, is the attitude toward the judiciary. Even in Watergate, Richard Nixon never questioned the decisions of the judiciary. Supreme Court told him, turn over the tapes, he turned over the tapes. Now, we've had all these legal decisions on the election. Trump supporters don't find some way to dismiss this. I have never quite seen this. Trump spoke about Republican judges, Democratic judges, which earned a rebuke from the Chief Justice. We don't judge along party lines. But now I'm seeing a reaction to that, even among some of the Democrats who are worried. And there's talk of packing the court. This came up during the Roosevelt administration of adding more justices so to tilt it back toward a more liberal Supreme Court. Because then Biden, I hope personally we do not go there, because that would undermine the legitimacy, to my mind, of the court. It would make the court look like a partisan political instrument. And that could undermine the rule of law itself. This is, I think, when people talk about a crisis of democracy, this is something I regard now as potentially very dangerous in the United States. The recent Supreme Court decision, quiet decision, on this new Texas abortion law, in which the 5 members of the majority did not issue an opinion, but they were the 5 in the majority. The 4 in the minority issued opinions, and they included the Chief Justice. And they said what the court had done was unprecedented. This is extraordinary coming from the Chief Justice. Remember, this is why I talk about the rule of law. The rule of law works by precedent. This is the rule of law works for the Chief Justice to begin his dissent by saying what the majority has done is unprecedented. You see where I'm going with this? This is a real alarm It's gotten very little attention here. It got some. I remember when I saw the first stories about what the Supreme Court had done, I was wondering, why don't they have any quotes from the majority? And then when I read more, the majority was silent. Not a single member of the majority thought to explain the reasons to the American people. That I also found, you could say, this is really. Whereas the minority were explaining, and the Chief Justice, because this was unexpected, the other in the minority were the liberals. The Chief Justice is known as a conservative. This was too much for him. And to say this is unprecedented is to my mind, a really shocking signal to the American people. We are talking about a crisis of democracy, but it's even the rule of law. As someone who studied in the Soviet Union, what impressed me about Gorbachev's perestroika, he said it was based on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant and the rule of law state. No longer the Communist Party dominating, the rule of law state. This is what we are supposed to be about. If that is jeopardized, even more than because of this populism to which you refer, that is an extraordinary danger to democracy everywhere. And that is happening here to a certain extent. It's happening in Europe too, with this Polish decision and the EU, and whose law is dominant. This is, when you talk about the EU, this is also now, it's sort of like the Godzilla monster coming out of the depths, breathing fire on the EU.
So, I wonder if what you think about, like, if Capitol Hill assault was like a green light to other right wings or other forces to that it was allowed to attack government building, like happened in also throughout Europe, in the UK and in France, and also in Italy recently. Do you think this was like a green line that showed that it's possible to do that?
There are these, I'm seeing these articles that these sorts of, civil disruptions like extinction are the way that, and I'm thinking, well, really? I mean, people forgotten the beer hall putsch? It's not just the enlightened people who do these sorts of things. Democracy is based on the idea, I think I'm right, but I realize I could be wrong. Majority goes against me. I will cede power on condition you allow me to continue to make my arguments. The British have this phrase, the loyal opposition. Just because you're in opposition to the government doesn't mean you are disloyal. It's simply a different point of view. And I saw this, again, as a student in the Soviet Union. You don't want to have the party line. You learn from the people who disagree with you. And I could get into arguments with the Soviet students, but I never felt personally threatened. And it was, I think, an introduction for them. They wanted to converse with an American. Why are you doing this? Hear it authentically from an American. This is one reason I am so much in favor of international education. This has exploded since I was a student. One of my concerns, I mentioned the walls going up, is the attitude towards students. We should be more welcoming. And something takes place with the students here. I was recently at an event, International Student House. This is an organization I like. It brings international, it houses them in the center of Washington. Well, they go, they may be, at one of our universities, or they may have a fellowship or whatever, but it's this house for international students. And it is delightful. And I was there for an event this week, and I'm talking to an Indian student and a Pakistani. They're friends. They're standing next to each other. We're all chatting. And I like this, the relations between India and Pakistan right now are really very bad. But here I see the young people, they come to the United States, they get to know each other, and they try to discuss the differences with their countries. They go to the same universities. I have seen this with students from a lot of places, different places. This was my hope for a better world. I look back to my student days where I could talk with the Soviet students. And it was the first time they heard some of these other ideas and these explanations. And to their credit, I could see they were taking this on board. I wish we could have some more of that, but I'm afraid of these psychological walls in places where people will say, "Oh, you shouldn't associate with those people. They're a threat. Don't. That is just going to harden attitudes." And I'm going on about this, but I wrote about this years ago, and I am concerned. COVID has put a stop to a lot of that international education. And I'll be interested to see how much of that continues now, or whether people will decide we can't risk going to other places, meeting with other people. If there is a sense that, they're all just spies or whatever, I think that will reflect the hardening of the attitude. It goes back to what I said earlier with that one Soviet speaker saying, "We are now going to be part of a global civilization." And this is one of the worst aspects of the world now. I never thought I would see the walls going up. Like after the Berlin Wall came down, I never thought I would live to see this. And there is a fundamental lack of humanity here. The lack of a sense of a common humanity. And this is like with the EU, and it's like, no, the national sovereignty is more, because this is all supposed to be based on universal human rights. Ultimately, a concept of universal human rights. This is what I saw in the Soviet Union. I'm going on quite a bit, but I was in then Leningrad in 1975 when the Helsinki Final Act was signed. And the Soviets published the entire Final Act in their newspapers so people could read it. And immediately I could see what was having an effect on people. I mean, I think a lot of people thought this was the end of the Cold War right there. We've reached this agreement, and it had more of a psychological impact looking back on it. And I think that contributed significantly to the end of the Cold War. That's why this one guy said, we're now going to be part of a global civilization. That was what the adoption of these international human rights standards signified. That's all gone now. I think this is a great tragedy that is all gone.
But on the second hand, it seems that I think maybe could be that populism has gone from politics to COVID, means that all the news, all the fake news about COVID, all the people believing on conspiracy theories. It's like COVID. It's like populism switched its attention from politics, us versus the other, to COVID with conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And
the COVID has contributed to some conspiracy theories. In the United States, it has contributed to an anti-Asian, particularly anti-Chinese sentiment. I've gotten, there have been various accusations, quite a number of accusations. And to be honest, I think the Chinese have made a mistake here by not allowing an international investigation, by rejecting something along these lines. I can understand why they are resentful, but realistically, it just feeds into some of the conspiracy theories here. But it reflects the underlying growing distrust now between the United States in particular and China. And I fear where this could lead. It's just, you know, when I look at the relations here, the metaphor I would use is the witch's cauldron from Macbeth. We're throwing all sorts of things into this bubbling cauldron in our relations. And you know, instead of being able to separate them out, what the Biden administration calls walk and chew gum at the same time, I've heard this for years. It seems to me instead the metaphor, as I said, is the bubbling cauldron. They're interacting with each other. They're worsening with each other. You know, and the fire is becoming more intense, like with COVID. It's not just that it originated in Wuhan, but it was the Wuhan lab. It wasn't that. So it ups the temperature, the accusations, you know, increase the temperature. And I'm concerned the cauldron may bubble over. You know, especially if you see the events recently. I'm becoming extremely apprehensive here. This is actually one of the most fraught times I've seen in the world, certainly in my lifetime. But even when I look back historically, I never thought I would see so much hate. You know, I wrote about this already in '93. You can see the hatred. Yugoslavia shocked me. What happened, that the country would break up even with some violence. I thought that could happen, but I never expected such a savage conflict. And after that, you had, you know, first breakup that you had Rwanda. That was, oh my gosh. And it just goes on and on. Islamic State, when Zawahiri denounced Islamic State for being so extreme, I thought they were finished. I figured who would join an organization, what Europeans would join an organization so extreme? It's been condemned by the head of Al-Qaeda. And I have been shocked. And you mentioned the Middle East, you know, they don't go away. Islamic State is still in Iraq. Like, how do they continue to recruit? I don't understand. I don't understand what the motivation is. This is so different from the Cold War. As I said, you know, even though the Soviet students have been, you know, brought up that we were the adversary, I didn't get that. I thought they wanted to be able to approach us when I was a student there. The people looked at our presence there as American students, I felt, and thought, this is a good sign. This means relations are improving and there won't be a war. And so where did the sentiment from Islamic State? How could it be so widespread? This is a phenomenon I don't understand. There's much in the world I don't understand.
That could be due also to new communication system, like the internet brought up and made it possible to join, to arrive to some extent to communicate, where before was very hard to communicate. You can, with the internet, you can communicate to the tiniest village out there, and if someone is a little bit, you can influence him. You have the possibility of doing it, which beforehand you didn't have. And maybe this brought to the extreme um, some things, some of the things you told us like now about this extremism, Islamic State, Islamic State, populism, and so on.
These extremist ideologies, it's like living in two different planets. I just don't understand it. I'm wearing a Georgetown t-shirt. I go to the universities. I see these young people. They want to improve the world. One of the two areas that really motivate them, I would say, the environment. They want to improve the environment. And medical research. They raise money for cancer research and so on. You can see if you walk through the science buildings, they're doing all this research, and we're coming up with new, look how quickly we came up with these vaccines. Now there's a vaccine for malaria that they're about to introduce. This is what I see these young people doing. And this is what you could say is the good planet. But then there's this other planet. And there's a lot of them as well. And the question I have, why are there so many of them? They could make this other choice. You know, it depends, you know, why do people want to believe these extreme ideologies? I mean, for me, the internet, I spend a lot of time, especially with COVID. What else are you going to do on the computer? But it is a fantastic way of learning about the world. And you choose what you want to look at. You know, people aren't forcing it at you. Years ago, I came up with a slogan saying, people believe what they want to believe. And I saw this when I was teaching a course, and, you know, I allowed the students a couple of options for written assignments. And one was 3 books for a book review, 3 book reviews. And after the first semester, I set a standard, a rule. You have to get the books approved by me. Because some of the students, they would choose books all with the same point of view. And you see, you know, I'm saying that's not an education, that's indoctrination. Right. Your mind is already made up, you're looking for reinforcement. And that is a choice. Some people just choose, I think with a lot of them, by the mid-20s people, their mindset is set. And you can see this, people turning to sources of information. They're just looking for reinforcement. And I think that's the we used to have a fairness doctrine on TV. So we had the 3 major channels, and they reported the news fairly down the middle. Wasn't much difference. Now, with cable and all these other sources, people are slicing. And that may be it, because people turn to the news source that reflects their own point of view. And it's gotten to the point here that some of these news sources, I think, are really not news sources anymore. They're basically sources for incitement. You can see the hosts, and they're getting worked up about this issue or that issue. And everybody's just getting, so worked up. And this is my concern here. This is why I say at the universities, you can have people. One of the problems I had with a lot of webinars that I was watching during the pandemic, all the speakers would be on the same page. So you'd have 3 or 4 speakers all representing the same point of view. There's no back and forth and no challenge. And that is not truly the democratic spirit. You need to have the sort of probe and response, and where people's views are challenged. As I said, one of the lessons I took away from my days in the Soviet Union, you learn from the people who disagree with you. At the very least, they force you to refine your own arguments. And at the same time, they can also point out flaws in your argument that you may not have realized. They may come up with evidence. They may have evidence that contradicts something So it's important to maintain those lines of communication with people. And so you can have a civil discourse, what I mentioned earlier about the loyal opposition. Part of my concern is we're moving away from that now. That's probably always been there, but the situation now seems to be worse than I remember.
Do you think could be a sign of crisis of the educational system? I'm talking about worldwide. Like, it has been lost the capacity of teaching people to be critic on, to search for many sources to make an opinion.
And that is a concern. I think the American education now is better than it used to be. The higher education, I can't speak to high school and below. I don't go there. Although when I somebody must be training these young people well, because when I see them at the universities, they're pretty good. But when I was an undergraduate, I would say the first couple of years, the education was basically professor would lecture and you would give it back on the exam. That's changed. There's now more emphasis, even starting with the first year, with critical thinking. You don't just, absorb and give back, which is the old model. You are supposed to challenge. You are taught to challenge. And I have argued this is the best way the United States will spread democracy throughout the world. It's not by beating people over the head. But I remember mentioning this to a Chinese friend. And she replied, this isn't so easy for us. Because the Chinese system, the exams, the meritocracy, it is the authority figure, and you give it back. That's the traditional education. The critical thinking is something different, but they respond. I remember talking to a Russian student, the same thing. We were contrasting that with her education in Russia. It was also already past Soviet. And she just praised the American education. This is something I think is valuable. However, now we have this phenomenon, I don't know how seriously to take this, of cancel culture and woke culture. You may not know what woke is, but it's this idea that, very left-wing progressive, and it feeds into the cancel culture. So, conservatives can't speak on campus. And I am seeing this a lot. Again, I'm not sure how seriously to take it.
You talked about exporting democracy. It seems that some countries the impression is that some countries are not ready for it. Means that is it still a valid model to export democracy into countries?
That's why I say the best way to do it is to have the young people come over here and they will absorb this culture of questioning. What I am looking at is generational change. I am inspired by something the physicist Max Planck said a century ago. He said, new ideas don't take over because the generation in power changes its mind. New ideas take over because the younger generation learns the new ideas, and they gradually succeed to the positions of power. This is why I think it has been especially valuable for people from post-Soviet countries, other countries that don't have these democratic traditions, for them to come here. They learn this type of thinking. They become accustomed to it. They will go back, and over time, I wouldn't rush it. I take a very long-term horizon. I think if you push it too fast, you run into the problem. You're going to get pushback from tradition. When I mentioned, the new generation, I call this the fiddler on the roof phenomenon. Tevye can bend to modernity a little bit, but in the final analysis, he can't bend with the last daughter. And that's the fiddler on the roof. If you abandon your tradition, this is very hard for people to do. They lose the sense of identity. And so you have to gradually transition. You shouldn't force it too quickly, because there are conservative elements in the society. And those conservative elements in the society will push back violently. We've seen this in revolutionary movements before. I mentioned Iran earlier. The Shah pushed really hard and he got whacked. And look what happened to Iran. I think generational change, this is why the educational system, educate the young people. They will come over. And I would also stress the rule of law. Something that has impressed me over the last few years, how many international students at our law schools. I am really quite amazed by this. This holds out the hope of an international legal system that is commonly recognized. If all these law students come here, they learn Western law, how we interpret the law. Maybe they're here to study business law. Say if they're from China. I'm astonished by the number of Chinese law students I have run into. Maybe they're here to study business law, but they will learn about constitutional law. They will learn about the human rights law. You can't avoid it. So it's part of the environment. You'll have to take a few classes on this. They will go back. Many of them, maybe not all of them, but many of them will go back. They will take that with them. And you could have an international legal order emerge from this. More and more, I'm convinced that is the best way to a more peaceful world. It's not just promoting democracy. I think Gorbachev had it right. The rule of law state on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. I don't know where that came from. It just appeared around 1988, and I began to see these references. I was, to Immanuel Kant and the rule of law state, and it's really quite extraordinary. I would particularly focus on this. I am very intrigued by the impact. It reminds me when I took my PhD orals, and I did very well. And my law professor took me aside. He didn't really know me at all, because as he said, I know you're more interested in that other stuff. With the strategic studies, I was like in the Soviet Union, you know. But he said, don't forget the law. Okay. Nod politely. I'd say beginning around 20 years ago, I think we've got all these conflicts, the Balkans. You know, these conflicts keep breaking out. Deterrence isn't working. Alliances they're not preventing the conflicts. More and more of these conflicts. And then I see these, I see the respect for international law in a lot of these other places. This was with the internet. As I say, I was reading about how people, the respect for the UN Charter. This is what I examined on specifically, was UN law. And the respect for the UN Charter that I saw around the world really astonished me. Because here in Washington, to be honest, it's not taken all that seriously. We're the superpower. We do what we want. But around the world, this was really taken very seriously. And I thought, maybe there is something to this. And more, as I look, this is where I disagree with a lot of my colleagues. I don't see deterrence working. I don't see the alliances working. But I look at all these young people in our law schools from all these different countries. And I think, maybe this could be the future, a better model. And we mentioned the internet repeatedly. It also allows people to maintain their friendships. Because now we've got this, with snail mail, it's too much effort. But with internet, it's fairly easy. Assuming we don't have firewalls. This is something I'm beginning to become more concerned about, that governments will restrict the information, and so you will have these firewalls. I remember once I was conversing online with an Uzbek friend. She was in Moscow. And I said, this is a miracle. And she thought I meant technologically, and that was part of it. But I meant also politically. In the old Cold War days, you couldn't have, this would not have been possible. Back then, this was maybe 10 years ago, we had this conversation. Relations were better. Now I keep hearing about these firewalls between countries going up again, like the Cold War days. That's another one of the walls I was speaking about. That, I think, would be tragic. If you were to break the ties. I think ties of friendship are very important. This is what I see happening again at our universities, is young people from all over the world are getting to know each other. We have a lot of cultural events. I assume you must have the same thing in Italy. This is something I've missed. The students love to put on these festivals, cultural festivals, and share their culture and foods and go to the others. They just love to do this. And it's sort of like a mini United Nations. I think this is a hopeful view of the future. This is what I say, the good planet. And I just hope that continues.
I hope to, actually. Dr. Kober, thank you for your time.
Okay.
As always, was a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of your day.